Imagine, demand and build a world transformed.
Welcome to our session this evening at the World Transformed. Joined this evening by Shannon Strucci, who is a YouTube video essayist and critic, and is best known for her video essay series Fake Friends, which looks at parasocial relationships in online culture. Also joined by Paolo Gabardo, who is author of The Digital Party, who researches the interaction between social movements, populism, technological platforms, and kind of culture more broadly. So just a couple of kind of logistical points. This session was kind of incorrectly advertised as a workshop. It's going to be more of a kind of panel discussion. But what I'd encourage everyone to do is go to community.theworldtransformed.org, where you'll find a forum thread for this session. If you want to sort of, there'll be, a lot of kind of online stuff we'll be covering here, so it'd be quite a good place to kind of collect related links and kind of discuss things. Like one of the like really notable features of both our kind of political popular culture at the moment is the amount of attention that gets paid to like a broad range of figures, often with a fairly significant level of intimacy. So that's whether we're talking about someone like Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie Sanders, or AOC, a lot of our commentators like Owen Jones and Ash Sarkar, or a kind of like enormous range of more niche figures. And the structure of popular cultures evolving in more or less the same way. So I guess we're joined by people with two different perspectives on this, one from more of a kind of political perspective and one of more of a popular culture one. So like to get started, Paolo, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, I suppose, like the backstory to our current kind of political moment, which, I mean, to me seemed to be kind of characterized really by like a kind of growing optimism for things like online democracy and sort of using technology to engage people more online. Maybe you could talk about that a bit.
Hi, everyone. I was saying, I hope you're all well, despite all the very weird times we are living and these times of seclusion that gives us more time for reflection, though, perhaps. And I'd say to start that, I mean, online culture and social movements, that's basically the first topic that we're discussing today. And what I was thinking before with this session is that now there's already a decades-long history. I mean, it's already basically 25 years that the internet became the web, became something not used only by scientists, physicists, artists, programmers, but by, say, the general population. And through these decades, it has become more and more massified, right? I mean, if you look at the stats about internet penetration or internet usage, you really see this curve going up like this. I mean, around the year 2000 is around 10% of the world population, then going towards kind of almost kind of 45% of the world population around the year 2010, which is right when social movements using the internet on a massive scale on social media explode. The famous movements of 2011, the movements of the square, so the so-called Occupy wave, right? And then basically it moves up slower, right? Because it's already kind of saturating, it's almost plateauing now. And now we are about 60%, right? 63%. I don't know exactly what's the last figure. I think this is really important context to understand the relationship between online culture, activism, politics, and social movements, because initially the internet was a minority phenomenon. It was a subcultural phenomenon, in a way. It was a countercultural phenomenon, because as all minority phenomena, they tend to go with more insular subcultures, right? That are very specific, that often tend to be a breeding ground for alternative cultures, alternative viewpoints. And that is very much what the internet was back in the days. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that, in the sense that, I mean, the late 90s, when I started using the internet, it was very much a space people from the left would look at as a space where to have a different life, a different way of life. That was particularly attractive if you were dissatisfied with a kind of mainstream culture you were immersed in. So in my own case, as an Italian, I was immersed in Berlusconi's Italy, where all the televisions basically were controlled by Berlusconi, where a kind of popular mass culture was very disgusting and unattractive for young people. And therefore the internet represented as a sort of escape, sort of exit way, where you could experiment different things, learn new things, encounter different cultures, different communities from the ones that were available in general reality, right? And I remember this scene that around those days, when I was studying at the University of Turin, that we would walk along the streets of Turin at night. Me and another friend was also a fanatic of the early internet, and we would look from the street at flats and at the windows where you had this beaming like green light from TV screens, right? And we were looking at these people as people on the Matrix, almost, right? I mean, as kind of people who were sucked in this system, this mass system, but we're hoping to escape. And then we had this wonderful new thing called the internet, where we were hoping something like that would be possible. But basically now the Matrix is the internet, if you want to put it in that way, in a sense that it has now become, for many people, in a way, the equivalent of what TV was in previous generations, right? It has become a place for entertainment. It has become a place for video consumption. It has become a place for video streaming. It has become the place where people go to watch Netflix films. Therefore, it's a very different kind of space compared to what it was, right? So I think that it is important to look at this relationship therefore in this way. Now, I'd say that the massification of the internet offers huge opportunities for activism, or at least it has offered huge opportunities for progressive activism, and that was most clear during the early 2010s. Right, it was at the time of explosion of social media, Facebook, Twitter. It was at the time where the curve of adoption was at its steepest in many countries, right? And also where for many people it represented a sort of new space to discuss, to get visibility, and so on and so forth. And that window of opportunity was actually exploited by many social movements, including the ones that I was talking about before, the movements of 2011, right? But then more and more, in a way, many activists felt that the internet and social media were becoming more and more massified and normalized, right? Also because for young people, it was becoming more and more unattractive, as while before it was their space, it then became the space of their parents and sometimes their grandparents. So a space where they could feel controlled, where they were constantly kind of viewed by other people, right? And that is what some kind of Zoomers or millennials call whatever the boomer invasion of Facebook and Twitter, which is why many young people have abandoned those platforms. They have moved towards more intimate, secluded platforms. I mean, I'd say first and foremost, instant messaging. I mean, the huge explosion of WhatsApp and then Telegram, Signal, all these things need to be understood in that light. People feeling too exposed on social media and wanting a kind of more safer space where they can discuss with friends. And secondly, moving to video sharing platforms, right? First Instagram and then TikTok. Right? So I'd say to conclude that really the connection between left activism and online activism needs to And online culture needs to be understood from this vantage point. The fact that the internet is not a fixed thing, but it is a moving phenomenon, right? And online cultures within the internet co-evolve with the internet and its transformations.
That's great. So Shannon, like kind of, I suppose, like gelling with that. Could you give a kind of like comparable sort of backstory to, I guess, the sort of aspects of internet culture that you're familiar with? So kind of, well, I'll leave you to go into that, but yeah, maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Like specifically the video aspect and that history, or just all of the different communities and how they evolved?
I mean, I guess kind of like maybe like video specifically, but I mean, yeah, I mean, take your pick.
Yeah, the way stuff is now is obviously it's completely different from 10 years ago, from 20 years ago, because I'm around 30, but I started using the internet probably when I was like 6 years old. And I remember downloading real player clips to watch videos, and it being very, like a lot of the internet being asynchronous, like using forums where you would make a post and then maybe an hour later someone would respond, and then an hour later you would respond back to them. And now everything is immediate and there's immediate feedback, and you're expected, if you're a content creator, to not only be accessible on social media, to be always instantly accessible, but with the popularity of stuff like Twitch and with YouTube streaming and the illusion of intimacy there, it's so weird to think that someone could be streaming to 20,000 people, and the platforms incentivize that person to provide the illusion of intimacy with all 20,000 people, you know, especially if they're donating money. And I guess politically, this is something that can be used to the advantage of leftist politicians. Like we were talking about AOC's Instagram streams and like a lot of other, or even like Bernie Sanders going on Joe Rogan, I guess. But then you end up with whatever platform they're using or whatever content creator they're using, you have to kind of deal with the backlash or the controversy inherent in that, like with Bernie Sanders and Joe Rogan. Yeah, it's completely different from how it used to be, and it's very strange. And watching leftist politicians that I respect, like AOC, doing sort of like clapback tweets against right wingers is very, it's like she is much more engaged in this kind of like online culture than a lot of other politicians are. If you can kind of tell, it's just their staff doing it and politician themselves. So that's sort of my take on that.
Yeah, and kind of like I suppose one of the topics you've kind of like helped popularize is the concept of like parasocial relationships, or popularize within a particular area of kind of internet culture. Yeah, these sort of like, I don't know, kind of asymmetric relationships, often like yeah, kind of like quite strong sense of intimacy that people develop with I mean like a huge variety of people that they follow. So yeah, could you go into a bit more detail about some of those?
Absolutely. A parasocial relationship is a one-way, non-reciprocated relationship. It could be with someone you're a fan of, it could be with a fictional character. There was a roboticist who talked about unidirectional bonds with people in their Roombas, how people would become like really emotionally attached to their Roombas and take them on vacation and stuff like that. And platforms, like I do YouTube videos, I do podcasting, so I've used Patreon for my main source of income for 5 years. And both YouTube and Patreon heavily encourage creators to foster parasocial relationships, to make your fans feel like they have special access to you, to make them feel like you're their friend, to give themselves special nicknames and stuff like that. And I thought that it was very, I always thought of it as kind of to foster this fake relationship with someone to exploit them for money or exploit them for attention. And then a lot of the examples I used in my videos too are content creators who then felt that pressure to take care of the audience emotionally or have an emotional connection with their entire audience when it was millions of people. And there are a lot of different YouTubers with big audiences who have had complete like mental breakdowns. And there's videos of them just sort of given up their life to try to sustain. And it's just a very intense topic and something that I hadn't seen talked about a lot. Like the term is from a study published in 1956 by two like psychologists or something. So the term had been around for a while, and they were reacting to the way new mass media, like television, was really different from radio, because on radio presenters would say ladies and gentlemen and be very formal, whereas on TV the person speaking would try to speak directly to the audience, like in their living room. And that's kind of where that started, and it's just been perfected and perfected over the years. And with platforms like YouTube and Twitch, it can just be this immediate like fake connection. But you can see it, like I said, with people, when fictional characters people really like die, they mourn for them. When people's Roombas break, they get very upset. It's like, this is just a thing that's not real, or someone that you didn't know. But people develop very strong relationships there. And they're not, I don't think they're all terrible or all insidious, but the way that they can be manipulated, or the way that they're fostered in place of actual relationships, I think is very harmful. So.
Yeah, and so that, I mean, that kind of like leads. You were kind of talking about how maybe like politics has changed by the arrival of the TV era. Like I'm thinking of someone like JFK. Like Paolo, could you kind of talk about how this is? Maybe over the last 10 years, we've seen this kind of come to play in the kind of political arena.
Yes, completely. I mean, I'd say if you take the foremost example of activism, online activism, say in the late 90s, early 90s, the main medium for that was probably the mailing list, right? So people discussing via email, which is an inherently horizontal medium, right? So it doesn't matter who you are. So perhaps if you're more influential, if you write well, you're more read on a mailing list. The public is the same, right? Visibility is the same, potentially, of anyone on a mailing list, right? And mailing lists were a key place where people would discuss things, they would share information. And so that tended to make those words, those communities, quite egalitarian, right? They tended to be quite egalitarian for the simple fact that there was no algorithm defining that, I mean, deciding that who had more followers would get more visibility. Instead, with social media, the key aspect, ultimately, if you think of social media, key way in which they've changed the functioning of the internet is that they've introduced very strong power dynamics, very strong power logics, with a very skewed distribution where you have one Justin Bieber and millions of believers, right? Or where you have one AOC and millions of AOC fans, right? So this thing they told us in the early wave of the internet, that everyone is a dog on the internet, or nobody knows if you're a dog on the internet, that we would all be able to have our corner shop on the internet. We could all create our homepage, right? For people who are old enough to remember that. So there was this idea of egalitarianism, we are all the same. It was completely overturned by what happened with social media, right? Where ultimately the economy of attention leads to the fact that there are very few people who get a lot of attention, a lot of visibility, right? So that engenders a dynamic that is far more similar to mass media than to the early internet. Right? I mean, following Manuel Castells, we could say that it's a sort of hybrid between the two, in a sense that the only real change is the interactivity. I mean, ultimately, something that Shannon was also referring to, the fact that there is an expectation that you are constantly responding to people. And popular micro celebrities, as they were called 10 years ago, I mean, popular people on Twitter, YouTubers, and so on and so forth, are those that constantly engage with the audience as well, right? But besides that, the kind of mass visibility, the mass logic, the celebrity logic that we previously associated with TV and with other pre-digital media is coming back. Right? And I think this is really what is interesting now, as some people are noticing the internet is resembling more and more TV, right? In a different ways, we consume it differently. We do binge watching, which we couldn't do before. We have more choice, perhaps, but ultimately, this idea that the internet would lead to an extreme, how would you say, decentralization and an extreme plurality of different ways of life and communities, it's a red herring. It was a red herring for a start, and it's now demonstrated to be such. I mean, some reasons are definitely down to the kind of capitalist logic behind social media and so on and so forth. But partly also the kind of the idealism behind the early internet was not sustainable in the long term, because ultimately in any community, people want to have the same reference points, right? People want to have the same sitcoms, the same movies everybody's watching, in order to have some sort of reference terms when they are discussing things, right? To compare their lives, to see where they sit with their career, with their love life or anything, yeah? Or to say, hey, did you see what person X said, right? So you see what I mean? I mean, there is an element of these being the result of capitalist marketization and banalization, but partly is also the result of inescapable human, say, tendencies, right? The attention economy, ultimately. I mean, even under socialism, we would have an attention economy, right? We would have a kind of cognitive limit. We would have a Dunbar number, right? There is the number of people you can handle. You can recognize by name, you can associate with a face. And I think that is something that needs to be taken into account and dealt with, right? And something that requires a mass imaginary, an imaginary where we are building mass audiences. We are speaking to the masses in the ways you can address the masses, right? With concentrating attention, focusing attention on a necessarily small number of channels and people.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's some sort of chat in the group chat about the sort of connection of this to, I guess, like the emergence of like kind of demagogues, yeah, kind of like relatedly, what do you think the sort of appeal politically of I don't know, I'm sort of thinking if we I don't know, if we think of someone like Trump using this sort of mechanic that exists. I mean, how sort of like specifically do you I suppose some sort of specifics of like how you see that kind of playing out at the moment?
Yes. Can I jump on that before Shannon continues? Yeah, I think that this is quite unpopular opinion, but I'd say that, I mean, demagoguery is not such a bad thing, in the sense now that we have this picture that I'm sure you guys also got in our kind of Western education about Athenian democracy, where it was also nice and people were in big assemblies and everybody could speak, no citizens were the same. I mean, this is not true. I mean, it's true that Athenian democracy was more participatory. If you were male and if you were not a slave and if you had money, you perhaps had a chance to participate more than you can in current politics, in existing societies. But then in Athens, you had people like Alcibiades or Pericles, right? I mean, you had celebrities also in ancient Athens. Right? It's not that that kind of, you know, it was not a sort of ideal society where all the contradictions of our society didn't exist, right? So I think that is important. I mean, personally, I come from a kind of idealistic perspective, from activism, from quite libertarian activism, and through time and anti-authoritarianism. And through time, I came to realize that we need, in a way, to square some contradictions about the persistence of authority and hierarchy and leadership and celebrity, without meaning that we need to accept authoritarianism, but democracy, in a way, is a tension between these two things, right? And that also applies to media and to online cultures, where ultimately, I mean, it would be nice if all of us could become celebrities. I mean, everybody wants to be a celebrity, or most people want to. That is not possible, not even 5 minutes, as Andy Warhol promised. I mean, that is not possible in a mass society. So in a way, the fact that the figures arise and they get all this attention is in a way inescapable, right? The question is, who are those people? I mean, the question is not whether this happens, but who these people tend to be, and if they end up being only people with very regressive views, very reactionary views, or also people who can voice socialist views, progressive views, and represent the popular classes, and not only those in power or those in the capitalist class.
Yeah, Trump was maybe a bit of an unsympathetic example to pick, but yeah, I mean, like, if we look back over what's happened in the UK over the last 4 years, you know, like Jeremy Corbyn was able to get so many things onto the agenda by, like, more or less serving as that kind of figure. Like, how important for this do you feel? Well, I mean, what do you think the relationship between the I don't know, almost like the figure and the kind of broader social base that it depends on is?
Is that for Shannon or?
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's just coming back to you. Yeah.
All right. All right. I mean, I think with Corbyn is a very strange thing, all right? Because Corbyn is an uncharismatic person, a person who was seen as not being very good at media, and actually wasn't that good. I mean, it got better through time, right? But at the start, he was really bad on everything. I mean, from the clothes he wore and the way he spoke and so on and so forth. So he didn't tick the boxes, the typical boxes of the hyper leader, right? Of the charismatic media personality, which now, unfortunately, or I mean, whatever, I mean, most leaders have to tick those boxes, right? I mean, and all the new left celebrities also do that, right? AOC being a case in point. But then, in a way, yeah, I mean, reality is always complex. So when you have a dominant trend, you also tend to have, in a way, always a resistance against that, which makes people who don't fit the picture attractive precisely because of that. So in the case of Corbyn, I think part of his attractiveness was down to that, the fact that he didn't look as a typical manufactured TV personality or media personality, which in turn paradoxically made him an interesting media personality. You see the kind of interesting media character. That's a bit the paradox with that. I mean, in Italy, there's a similar example with Giuseppe Conte, the current prime minister, who vis-a-vis Salvini, the populist right-wing leader, is the complete opposite. Salvini is a beast with social media and everything. He's really dangerous because of that, because he really is really good at smelling. He has a very good sense of smell, of political smell, right? Anticipating trends, being very forward-looking, being on TikTok very early, whatever, right? While Conte is a lawyer, he looks like a lawyer, he's terribly boring, it's terribly technical, but that makes him attractive in some ways, right? So I think with Corbyn, similar reasoning applies.
I think it's the perception of authenticity and the perception of sincerity with people like Corbyn or with like Bernie Sanders, and people are attracted to that. Even if someone is like off-putting, it's do they seem authentic versus being charismatic or traditionally charismatic in the way you would expect of a political leader.
Yeah, that sort of like I mean, possibly kind of like yeah, like helps with forming those kinds of relationships.
Shannon, what would be interesting would be to, I mean, like with Bernie Sanders, I mean, how do you see that? I mean, if I can interject and ask Shannon a question, because I think I'm very curious about that. Because you say these about, I mean, Bernie Sanders looks to me as a rather different media character vis-a-vis Corbyn, right? In a sense that he is also, in a way, geeky, as Corbyn is, but from the very start, he looked like a more media savvy person, right? A more charismatic person, a good speaker. How do you see that?
Sorry, my internet cut out. Could you repeat that?
I mean, what's your
Sorry about that.
What's your take on the difference between Corbyn and Sanders as two different kind of media characters? Because to me, Sanders is far more charismatic than Corbyn, right? Though at the same time, he has this kind of geeky element to him that makes him similar to Corbyn.
I think I was more thinking of Sanders in opposition to someone like Barack Obama, who is much more, I would say, traditionally charismatic and like more quote unquote American, I guess, or more in line with traditional American values. I don't know if I've seen enough of Corbyn speaking really speak to the difference between the two of them, honestly. But I think the reason that I was attracted to Sanders as a potential candidate, on top of his politics, obviously, and in a more parasocial way with his personality, is that he seemed less of a politician, which I think the way you were speaking on Corbyn as well, I think also applied to him. Like someone pointed out in the chat, it is pretty subjective, I guess, and especially I also just have a tendency to also be put off by traditionally charismatic and political figures, and I feel like a lot of the charisma is a lie or it's manipulative. But then people who are projecting authenticity, it can be just as much of a lie in a different way. So you never really know unless you're actually working with the person.
Yeah, do you want to come back on that, Paolo, or should we move on?
Yes, quickly on that. I mean, I think what Shannon was saying, I think is very true. In that, I mean, authenticity is in a way the objective of many of political leaders in this day and age. The paradoxical thing is that authenticity itself is manufactured. Right? So the way politicians use social media revolves around giving this impression of authenticity, of intimacy, direct contact, right? Showing you the kind of the backstage, how people really are. Why? Because politicians, we live in an era of profound political distrust, and politicians want to reassure the public that they are people in flesh and bones, just like us. They're not robots or whatever, Terminators, and therefore you have these videos that look authentic, they look unscripted, yeah, but they are scripted to look unscripted. Yeah? So that's the big paradox there. And I mean, also, if you look, I mean, Kamala Harris, before being candidate for vice president, I think she had a lot of these Now also Joe Biden, if you look at his Instagram feed, is trying to, because people look at Joe Biden as someone who's very, is the typical machine politician, right? But machine politicians don't have good press on social media, right? So they are constantly trying to construct this authenticity that is quite inauthentic ultimately.
Like Hillary Clinton's hot sauce in her bag comment, or a lot of the stuff that she did during her campaign had a very negative reaction because it was perceived as inauthentic. Like her vines, the Pokemon go to the polls, they were all like Twitter memes based on stuff she had said.
I mean, how does stuff like kind of left tube come into all of this? Because there's yeah, I don't know. We sort of have this kind of current of like organic intellectuals appearing, often with like a very kind of defined aesthetic. And yeah, there seems to be sort of some relevance to that. I don't know. Do either of you kind of want to pick up on that?
I can for a little bit. I think when LeftTube first kind of emerged, and we had this discussion off mic before this, is that LeftTube is a name given by fans and journalists. It's not anything that was deliberately fostered by the people that we're talking about. And in fact, like LeftTube and BreadTube, they don't like that name because it's giving a grouping to people and kind of like an intergroup responsibility and a sense of cohesion that is not really there, that people just kind of assume is there, that's just sort of like parasocially projected onto them. But when they first emerged, I was wondering if they would be the left's answer to like Ben Shapiro or people like that. And some of them have gotten a pretty big fan base, but not nearly on that same level, I guess. And even then, it's so weird to give that level of like social power or sway to people who just are good at YouTube. Like I'm friends with a lot of these people and I have a lot of respect for them, but making people make an entertaining YouTube video about politics or philosophy or media critique from a leftist perspective and considering them like public intellectuals or activists, that might be too much responsibility. I don't know, it's very weird, especially like I said, knowing these people and being kind of adjacent to them. I'm very happy that they exist, but some of the expectations or the pressures put on them might be too much for people who like aren't activists or don't have a lot of past activist work, or who have no, you know, they don't want to be politicians or be seen as politicians, but they're because there's such a lack of leftist public intellectuals, some of that is being put on them. It's very weird. And like I said, even this nickname for this group of people who just sort of happen to align, there have been a lot of up and coming YouTube creators who will like put BreadTube in their Twitter bio and try to take the aesthetic from PhilosophyTube or ContraPoints. Very purposefully be like, I'm going to be a part of BreadTube. I'm going to do this as part of their branding, when it's not something that was ever purposefully cultivated in the first place. And that feels kind of, I don't want to admonish people who do that, but it feels a little weird or a little cynical if the original people all reject that name. I don't know, it's a very strange and kind of like always evolving place that's very, like, very interesting to be kind of on the sidelines of, because I think my videos aren't as overtly political. I get that people will bring me up in BreadTube discussions, then people will like angrily exclude me from it too. So I'm just like, okay, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. But yeah, that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah, I guess the risk there is that it becomes something that is very self-referential, right? That speaks only to people,
yes.
to people who are already part of the left and who have read the entire whatever works of Lenin, Marx and Gramsci, and especially the intellectual left, right? It speaks only to left intellectuals. While the strength of the right on YouTube is that it speaks, or it attempts to speak to the general population. I mean, also through weird conspiracy theories on YouTube, right? that form these rabbit holes where you start with whatever, with an interest, whatever. You watch something on 9/11, to watch an old video of 9/11, and then it goes into truthers, and then it goes into whatever weird Illuminati Bilderberg theories, and then it goes into no vax, no mask, and it goes into canon, and so on and so forth. But those are crazy theories, but they are made to attract the general population, right? I mean, luckily enough, not yet the majority of the population really buys into that. But I think with the left, sometimes the problem is that on social media, it is speaking to the left because it wants to, people are often more interested in the internal debate, in internal type of war, in the internal fight, to have the correct position, right? Which is the typical left obsession. So, you know, Trotskyists versus Stalinists versus woks versus dirtbags versus, you know, people want to be right and to be recognized to be right, instead of adopting the position of saying, whatever, I already know what my part stands for. Now I'm going to basically persuade people. I'm going to be an evangelist, right? I'm going to preach the position of a preacher, right? More than the position of a sectarian, whatever, infighter, right? So that is a very significant downside of the left attitude towards social media vis-a-vis the right, right? Because the right knows who the enemy is. It goes for the left. Instead, the left often thinks that the enemy is another brand of left. So that is, I think, something we need to reflect on, because it is really self-destructive, especially in present times where enemies and dividing lines should be clear enough.
I suppose the question that leads on to is what kind of culturally, what can we do about that? Like, I mean, that's I think maybe the framing we've got so far is like a little bit pessimistic, because obviously lots of people are, you know, doing, there's a lot of organizing going on, but like, but yeah, like how could you see this kind of, this situation, to the extent that it exists, kind of being resolved or improved at least? Like
sectarianism specifically, or just the whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we can kind of solve sectarianism, but like, I suppose, like, specifically the way that we use online platforms and online media, and I suppose the kind of framing and like direction that we have.
I guess for me, just making the documentaries and calling attention to parasocial relationships, or just trying to give the people the tools to be more aware of the ways that they were being manipulated, whether it was a political figure or just someone that they were a fan of. The problem is people don't want to hear that. Some reactions I got were very, very angry, like death threats level angry. Are people just making accusations that I was being cruel, or just getting very, very upset because belonging and the sense of comfort that people find in these figures that they like worship, or that people find, like Paolo was talking about, in like smaller and smaller communities online. Like if this person has this political identity, they don't want to like ever, it's such a part of themselves that they never want to shed it, and they want to fight. They like fighting, and even if it's infighting, and even if it's over, like, I think some level of criticism is really important, but I think perspective is important too. And there are arguments on Twitter that I don't even understand saying, and like the average person would have no idea what they're arguing about. It's like, I wish people would actually go offline and like go to protests or get involved locally politically, but that's always going to be a lot more work. It's like, how do you incentivize people to do something like that? And I think Matt in the chat brought up Matt Christman's Grill Pill streams, where he also encouraged people, like, log off of the internet, go find a skill. and find something you're good at and improve yourself and actually do stuff that's challenging to you as a person. And then through that, learn how you can get involved politically, which I think is a really good thing to say, but you're fighting against so much, you know, with that. It's really difficult. And you can, with whatever platform you have, you can incentivize people to actually get involved, but it's way easier to just, for leftists to just argue online and pretend that matters and then never actually go do anything, I guess.
Yes, totally. I really agree with Shannon there that, you know, that there needs to be a change in attitude from left activists online and on YouTube as well, that you really need to think of the audience as the general population. I mean, ordinary folks, ordinary people, for much these terms may look inauthentic themselves, as obviously there's not a specific person that embodies that. But say, go beyond the bubbles that we are all immersed in, and partly we need some bubbles, and this is a bubble we are in now, and we need times of reflection and internal debate. But then for the general practice, the understanding should be that we need to persuade an audience that is perhaps very different from us, right? It doesn't have the same level of education, the same upbringing, the same kind of metropolitan way of life, right? And that doesn't understand our terms and our acronyms and our issues and our agendas, that perhaps is on board with many issues, with LGBT rights, women's rights, with social equality. But if we speak about those things in our terms, they would be alienated by them, right? They would think that these are extremist or radical positions that have nothing to do with that. But if these issues are instead couched in a language of common sense and reasonability, they can persuade the majority, right? Which is ultimately the entire point of political activity, persuasion, of political propaganda, which is what the right is doing precisely, right? The right is never going there and say, as a conservative thinker, whatever, informed by the teachings of Margaret Thatcher, I'm telling you this. No, it's telling you that, and without any premise, without any intellectual affectation, anything, and sometimes even using mythology, right, which is all these conspiracy theories and non-vax movements are all about, in a very interesting way, in a very dangerous and toxic way, but in ways that should also perhaps lead us to some reflection on mythology. I mean, that doesn't mean that we need to tell people false facts or lies, but it means that we need to give people narratives. We need to be good storytellers. We need to be very good at storytelling in order to persuade people, right? And simplify things, explain things in very simple ways, and also use video much more, because the left is a textual culture. People on the left like to read a lot, perhaps too much, especially people like me. They like to write a lot, perhaps, no, certainly too much, right? And normal people, yes, they like to do that a bit, but they prefer perhaps more visual media, more video-based media, right? And that is why the right is so hegemonic, for example, on YouTube, clearly, right? Because they are more well predisposed to present themselves, to show themselves, to speak in public without the sense of shame that the left sometimes attaches to being seen in public on video.
I think that was like the beginning of what they call BreadTube and the rise of like Chapo Trap House, and especially H Bomber Guy, who's one of the big BreadTube personalities. Is he got his start basically making fun of anti-feminists and making fun of Gamergate type people, and he was engaging in the same kind of like mean dominance focused humor that a lot of the right uses, but with a different target. And I think a lot of people are only really looking for someone to be funny and to be confident, and he got that. So I think he took a lot of that fan base, or grew his fan base initially just based on that, and it just sort of speaks speaking that language and not taking himself too seriously and not coming across as stilted. A woman, Anita Sarkeesian, who's always made like feminist critiques of video games, and I always felt she was like, I don't want to attack her as a person, but it was very like theory heavy and kind of very self-serious and kind of stilted. And it's like, no one's going to watch this who doesn't already agree with you. And I mean, I'm a feminist, my work is feminist, my work can be off-putting to right-wing people, but I think there is something in, you have to figure out who your target audience is, and is it only going to reach people, like you were saying, people who already agree with you or people who are already on the left, and how much you're willing to sacrifice, because I think it is a sacrifice to keep, or it's a lot of work, not to dumb it, what you're saying down, but to make it more accessible. And how many concessions are you willing to give to not to, for other people's comfort watching your video too? Like how far, I guess, right is a person gonna be watching your video before they get upset and turn it off? You know, because it's that balance between trying to get as big an audience as possible without watering down your beliefs. And it's something I've struggled with as like doing podcasts and doing YouTube, and I've gotten more political as I've gone along because it felt cowardly not to. But I know I would get a lot more views if I was just like less political or simplified things more. So it's I don't know. And I was gonna say too, like I'm from the South. I live in the South. There are a couple of, there's like the liberal redneck comedian Trey Crowder, and there's another guy with like a really strong Southern accent who goes on Facebook and does like liberal leftist political videos. And those are very popular with certain people because they're coming from like, hey, I'm from the South, I'm a redneck too, but like this is why, this is like about like Black Lives Matter or gun violence and stuff. So there is definitely an appeal of like trying to, I guess, reach that same sort of audience in a simple way, or at least it's like profitable. I'm sure they get a lot of ad revenue doing that. I hope they change people's minds, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a someone mentioned in the chat, are we going to go to kind of questions? Yeah, like if you've got questions, or I guess given that like framing sort of ideas, then please drop them in.
I'm trying to see if we've missed any. There might have been some that were already asked.
Yeah.
If people can paste them in again.
Oh, so got one here from Zara. We've seen examples of political personalities on the right being platformed much faster and even more lucrative rate than on the left. Why does the panel think this is? And is it the eternal external forces or our approach?
I mean, I'd say that without getting conspiratorial, we know that the right has a lot more money behind, right? I mean, the press.
I don't know. I know that.
Yeah. Please, Shannon.
Sorry, my internet cut out. I was like, oh no. Well, I know there are just a lot more outside funding sources for the right. There just are on if we're talking about YouTube specifically stuff. I think someone else in the chat mentioned like PragerU. Like no one's giving, like all of the left-tube people that I know, they're all funded by fans, and like Chapo's funded by fans. No one's getting that level of money. And someone else in the chat mentioned too, like left-tube people can't put something up every single day or churn out content at the rate that the right can. And then it's like, so then the algorithm favors people who churn out content and favors engagement. And like you were saying, Paolo, the leftists do have a tendency to get to like talk in theory and to make stuff that's like really, really dense. And it's like, well, that's maybe not as well suited to a platform if you're doing something every single day and you just want numbers, which is how you get more numbers, which is how you get more engagement. So I think like if we could find a better funding source, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm glad Patreon exists, but it can't rival, like I said, that like someone said, that PragerU money. That's my opinion on it.
Completely. I mean, like, yeah. I mean, I think we need to realize that the right is very well funded, which doesn't mean that the left can never win, but that the stakes against us, I mean, they're really high, right? I mean, and sometimes then people get obviously inoculated. I mean, they develop antibodies against right-wing propaganda. I mean, think about Lula in Brazil. In Brazil, there is an overwhelmingly right-wing mainstream media system. And I think Lula was elected at the 4th time he tried to become president. And in the previous times, it was really a very blatant right-wing manipulation, even during the TV debates, right? But then people started to realize in the Brazilian electorate, then yeah, when the media was saying something, you had to, in a way to recognize the bias and know that things were not really as they were saying them. And there is also, I mean, the question of how to create left-wing media and how to find ways to fund them, right? Because the left at its height was very good at collecting money, right? Using the power of people to collect a lot of money, a little bit of money from many people, turning it into a lot of money, yeah, to counterbalance that. But then this day and age, we've gotten very bad at that. Unions are very bad. Unions are very bad at getting donations. Unions are bad because we as union members are bad, right? It's not the unions, I mean, because we are not able, I mean, the kind of militancy and commitment is not there at the level that is necessary to do this, right? So in a way, it's really going back, doing things that we were doing very well in the past, and doing them in different ways, obviously, right? We cannot go back to the old ways. But yeah, really recognizing the challenge. I mean, the challenge is really serious, is really real. That is why the right is so strong and has been so strong for decades, right? It's not a conspiracy, it's a situation of power, is the relation of force. And we need to realize what it is, how strong that is, and work against it. Perhaps with a little bit more long-term perspective than we have now, because also creating YouTube personalities or creating people who are good at that, it also requires investment, it requires funding, it requires training people, it requires schooling people, it requires more structure than people.
And I know Means TV is an attempt at like a worker streaming network that recently started. I haven't really looked at most of their stuff, but a lot of people I know, like I respect, are involved with that. So at least that seems like if that ends up being sustainable and successful, that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Does that is it kind of like who's the I'm just wondering who the that's kind of pitched towards? Is it kind of is it pitched towards leftists, or is it
It's very pitched towards leftists. I remember them having a tweet about how they were going to abolish advertising, or like there's a lot, they pitched themselves as an anti-capitalist, worker-owned streaming service, or like a co-op. And I think all of their stuff is very left-wing. But it's all, I think it's all, you know, paid for by subscribers rather than advertisers.
So we've got a question here from Leah. You can probably read it. But yeah, a lot of leftist social media figures, quite middle class or bookish. Why does left social media lack a working class identity, unlike its base? I don't know. Paolo, do you want to take that?
There was a question from Jessica as well. I mean, to what extent is the internet being a democratizing force? And yeah, she says basically that there is a neoliberal stranglehold on the internet, but it has also favored populist uprisings the world over. And I think that, yeah, that is true. I mean, ultimately, it's a very contradictory terrain in a sense that sometimes because of the profit motive, media open unwittingly spaces for social movements because they want to make money. In order to make money, they need to give something they don't have. And that includes freedom of expression. They're selling basically freedom of expression. Not because they believe in freedom of expression, that's clear enough, but the sort of collateral effect of their profit motive sometimes is opening, unlocking perhaps tiny spaces of freedom of expression, which then can give way to social movements. And around 2010, 2011, that is what happened with social media and social movements, right? They were basically entering a market, and by entering the market, they were also unwittingly offering social movements a window of opportunity. Then to the question on why is the left so bookish and so intellectual, which is, I think, a real problem. I mean, it's both a resource, obviously, but it's also a problem. And that is down to social composition. I mean, Piketty put it that, you know, that we live in a time of the merchant right and the mandarin left. Because social professionals, social and cultural professionals tend to vote for the left. The new middle class, so-called, the intellectual middle class, tends to vote for the left. And it's a class that has broadened and grown more and more. While the commercial class, managers, accountants, technicians, the so-called old middle class, the old petty bourgeoisie, votes for the right. Yeah. Now, there is a problem with that if people don't realize that there is only part of the left, because the other kind of part of the left coalition is the working class, right? And is the manual working class, or the industrial working class, and the service working class. Therefore, I mean, the intellectual middle class should understand that it is only a part of a coalition. It needs to be able to speak to those other sectors if we are able to build a coalition that is bigger than the adversary coalition. The risk there is that, as Shannon also pointed out before, that is more a kind of self-referential, self-serving conversation that only alienates those other people that we need instead to bring on board.
I think specifically with social media online, I mean, a lot of people that I've followed and interacted with would be like the Bernie bro dirtbag left types, which get a lot of sometimes fair disdain from the left at large, but I think are more appealing to people to a certain kind, as a more sort of bookish, self-serious leftist. I think they have brought a lot of people further left. Maybe it's not always people that we necessarily want on the left, because there's some terrible people in their fan bases as well. But I kind of, coming from when I grew up online, I spent a lot of time in like edgy image, like I used to post on 4chan, and I kind of understand that culture pretty well. And also like growing up in the South around working class people, I can kind of understand how they might be more attracted to a dirtbag ethos versus a much more like strict, like self-serious leftism, even though I would have critiques of both approaches. But there is a lot of that online, but I don't know how. It's probably just I'm in that niche a lot. It's my echo chamber is like irony leftist. So I see a lot more of it than a lot of people.
Yeah, but sometimes perhaps the dirtbag left is not, I mean, yes, it's true that the ethos is perhaps more attractive to the working class than the woke left, but sometimes it just looks as part of the same class. It is still the intelligentsia, and perhaps people who were woke just the day before, and then now are kind of, as a matter of distinction, they are turning against the woke left, but it is, again, a very inward-looking conversation. So it's a sectarian conversation, basically. Wokes attacking dirtbags and dirtbags attacking wokes, right? I mean,
it's exhausting. I agree.
My impression sometimes, yeah.
It is all stuff where if you went up to like not, shouldn't say normal person, but if you went up to an average person on the street, they would have no idea what you were talking about and not care. Whereas they would care about like healthcare and care about, you know, LGBT rights and other stuff that is ultimately more important than those sort of sectarian arguments.
I mean, sometimes I get asked by people, I mean, about acronyms that you see online, and I mean, TERFs and other acronyms that people use by now as something everybody understands, right? But really kind of assuming that, I think, is really, I mean, this is something Max Weber says, that the first symptom of a sect is ununderstandable jargon, obscure jargon. When you start dropping these terms as if people already knew, that means that there is a problem, that you are having kind of a conversation within a sect rather than a kind of public conversation that everyone is supposed to understand. So perhaps very quickly, I think that, yeah, that is basically an important concept to explain or to conceptualize everything we said so far, which is ultimately we live in a capitalist system where communication is central, right? And therefore we need to deal with that. And knowing that capitalism feeds on communication, but by feeding on communication, it also opens some windows of opportunity. That is the kind of, I think, the point I was making before, right? That is why social media are or were an interesting space for mobilization, because these people made money on communication, and therefore they had to leave a little bit of space for people. And whenever there is space, people use it. But then obviously there's also downsides, because then gets quickly sucked in once again, gets reintegrated, recuperated all the time. I think that is what the concept is useful for.
There's a space for a dirtbag left in the UK. Do we think that's a sort of would we want that? Is it sort of like, yeah, I guess kind of culturally possible?
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there is only one left, the socialist left, and cultural wars are poisonous and toxic, and both extremes. And I've been involved in these things, and I've seen both sides, and I don't want to have anything to do with both sides, with both extremes, because I think they really are taking politics to religion. They're turning politics into religion, into absolute positions, into extremes that have nothing to do with real politics and nothing to do with real people's lives. I think if you speak to the general public, they will be on board with our issues as long as we couch them in the language of reasonability. If you turn them into absolutes, nobody is on board with them, either sides. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, it's time to move beyond this kind of internecine struggle. Let's leave the cultural war, internecine cultural war to the right? On no vax, no mask, and all those crazy stuff. It would be good to witness them getting internecine struggles around crazy theories, right? I think the point of the left should instead basically agree on a common sense platform that is progressive, but also reasonable, right? On cultural issues, but more so on socioeconomic issues, because what defines the left is thinking that socioeconomic issues are central and that they are the way in which we can unite people of different creeds, people who are more liberal, a bit less liberal, right? People who different religions, different worldviews, different ways of life, right? But they are united ultimately by the same interests, right? By the same material interests.
I guess just sort of like kind of taking things forward just before we just before we finish.
We did get an interesting question just now.
Oh, did we?
If you wanted to cover it, about disabled people, which I think we should talk about. From Kendrick Flowers, has the internet created more opportunities for disabled people to engage in politics? I would say I'm definitely not an expert. I think it has, because we talk about being active at protests in real life and logging off and stuff, but that's physically impossible for a lot of people. And I do think the internet has created ways for people to engage, and also just like accessibility. I wish that more internet, like leftist content creators and whatever, cared more about accessibility, stuff like captioning and that kind of thing, which does reach a broader group of people. But I don't know, I don't think I know enough about activism and the specific barriers to activism for disabled people to confidently respond to that. But I thought that was a question that I thought we should cover, because I thought it was good.
Sorry, just having some slight technical difficulties here.
So someone just said that this was their first opportunity to partake in this because they're housebound. So they, if this was like held in person, they wouldn't have been able to participate, but because it's over Zoom, they were.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the ways the internet and social media proved democratic, right? I mean, people who are disabled or people who are living in remote, geographically remote areas, mothers or people with family commitments or with elderly parents, caregivers, that have been able to participate in discussions more than they would have done otherwise, right? Some people on the left sort of myth of the meeting, and I mean, meetings are invaluable. We actually know this now better. We cannot meet anyone, right? To build trust, to socialize, and to create a sense of bonding, social bonding, because we are social creatures, as we know. But at the same time, I feel this is a major upsides of the internet, the fact that it has given people parallel ways, at least, to participate in things that were not possible before. That is one of the real kind of really existing digital democracy, if you want to put it like that.
One of the things I miss about in-person meetings is that sort of like weird kind of lag you get at the end of when someone's finished speaking and you're not quite sure what's going to happen next. I just keeping an eye on the questions. Is there anything more in there?
There is one more from Lorcan Whitehead. If Paolo wanted to take it, about like, or we could both take it. Like, do we need these sorts of figures for the left? Like, are parasocial relationships good or bad in this context? If Paolo wanted to start, I guess, and do we need to call it at that, Chris, and not take any more, or like what's time looking like?
Yeah, so we've got kind of like 15 minutes. So yeah, let's do that.
So very quickly on that, I'm all for parasocial relationships. So that's a point of contention between me and Sharon, I think. I mean, for a simple reason, in the sense that people, I mean, this is something we know from psychology, right? Psychology of groups, Sigmund Freud. People need to identify themselves with something, with a group. And they often do that through an intermediary object, right? It can be a symbol, it can be a slogan, it can be a color, it can be a phrase. And often, since we are humans, we tend to identify with other humans who stand as a kind of signifier for something else. Therefore, especially when it comes to mass politics, the existence of common signifiers and common humans acting as signifiers is particularly important as a means to have more outreach, to have people who can then go on TV, for example, and represent us, right? So, for example, for me, like Novara Media, that was cited at different points in some of the comments, the most important thing that Novara Media did, in a way, more than their own YouTube videos and their own programs, was the fact that they prepared people who then were able to go on TV and speak to the general audience, right? So that there is a very important thing also of these alternative media, that they create media personalities that then are not only media personalities in the kind of the self-produced in the alternative media space, but then can go on and become media personalities in the mainstream media space.
I do think we obviously need them at a certain level, because you don't want to just have like a robot for a politician with no personal connection to people or no like emotional investment or personal investment. But I think like the experience of being a leftist in the US in the past few years was like Bernie Sanders not getting the nomination was so like personally devastating to some people, like because they had pinned all of their hopes on him. And that's a big criticism of the dirtbag left being like Bernie or bust and all this stuff. When I wish people had, rather than just one central person pinning all their hopes on, it's like, why don't you care less about like presidential politics and get more involved locally and just try to shift that energy to something else, like you said, to an idea or a slogan rather than a person, because people are so fallible. But I think that's cynical to a certain level. And I know that a lot of change can come from someone who has a charismatic and commanding presence and has like a fan base. But I think there are dangers in it, just in the insidiousness of parasocial relationships, but also when you pin all your hopes to a person, and then they either there's some sort of scandal, or they don't make the nomination. There sometimes will just kind of give up, and that's unfortunate. That's an unfortunate aspect of it.
Do you want to come back on that, Paolo, or should we? We've got a couple more questions that we want to get to as well.
Sorry, I think Shannon's point was a very good closing point. One of the problems with the left is that we carry on for too long, or perhaps to lead by example, we could stop it here.
Not overstay our welcome, but just keep hearing the sound of our own voices.
Yeah, maybe that is a good place to leave things. Yeah. So yeah, thanks to both of our speakers, and thanks to everyone for watching. Yeah, we'll add some links to sort of some of the things we've been talking about in the on the session page. But yeah, thanks everyone.
View the full TWT20 program and become a supporter today to help us deliver political education all year round at theworldtransformed.org.